How does a nation, born from the brutal machinery of empire and forged in the fires of sugar plantations, rise to become a leader in the Caribbean? This is the extraordinary story of Trinidad and Tobago. It is a tale of resilience, a journey from subjugation to sovereignty, from the chains of slavery to the vibrant rhythms of Carnival. This twin-island republic, nestled at the southern edge of the Caribbean archipelago, holds a history as complex and layered as its society. Its past is a dramatic narrative of indigenous cultures erased, European powers battling for control, and a people drawn from Africa, India, China, and beyond, all forced to build a new world together on these small, fertile islands. The echoes of this history are not confined to museums. They live and breathe in the streets, in the music, and in the very spirit of its people today. To understand Trinidad and Tobago is to understand the potent mix of pain and creativity that defines so much of the Caribbean story. The islands were once seen merely as strategic outposts and agricultural factories, their value measured in barrels of sugar and the human lives sacrificed to produce it. Yet, out of this crucible of exploitation, something remarkable emerged. A unique cultural identity began to take shape, one that blended disparate traditions into a new, dynamic whole. The journey from a colonial backwater to a modern, energy-rich nation was never simple or straightforward. It was a path marked by struggle, by political awakening, and by the relentless pursuit of self-determination. The question of how this nation not only survived but thrived is central to its identity. The story begins long before the first European sails appeared on the horizon, with the island's original inhabitants. It then winds through centuries of Spanish neglect and subsequent British ambition, which transformed the landscape and its population forever. The introduction of African slavery on a massive scale laid a foundation of immense suffering, but it also brought a cultural inheritance that would prove indestructible. After emancipation, the arrival of indentured laborers from India added another profound layer to the social fabric, creating a society of incredible diversity and, at times, considerable tension. These historical forces did not simply happen. They were actively navigated by generations of Trinbagonians who fought for their rights, their dignity, and their future. From these tumultuous origins, Trinidad and Tobago has carved out a unique place on the world stage. It is a nation whose wealth is built on the oil and gas beneath its soil, but whose soul is expressed through the pulsating energy of Carnival, the inventive genius of the steel pan, and the sharp social commentary of Calypso music. Today, it stands as a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to create, to innovate, and to forge a cohesive identity from a fractured past. This essay will trace that incredible journey, exploring the key moments and movements that shaped this small nation into the vibrant, complex, and influential republic it is today. It is a story of a people who refused to be defined by their oppressors and instead chose to write their own destiny. Long before the arrival of Europeans, the islands we now know as Trinidad and Tobago were home to thriving Amerindian societies. The Arawak-speaking peoples, particularly the Taino, were among the earliest settlers, establishing villages primarily across Trinidad. They were skilled farmers, cultivating cassava, maize, and sweet potatoes in cleared plots of land, a practice known as Canuco agriculture. Their society was organized and peaceful, structured around chiefs or caciques who governed communities. They were also expert potters, weavers, and canoe builders, crafting large vessels that allowed them to navigate the waters between the islands and the South American mainland, engaging in trade and maintaining cultural ties with their continental relatives. Life was deeply connected to the natural world, a spiritual existence woven with reverence for the land and sea. The Carib-speaking Kalinago people were also present, particularly in Tobago, and had a reputation among Europeans as fierce warriors. This characterization, often exaggerated by colonial chroniclers to justify their own violence, belies a complex society with its own rich traditions. Like the Taino, they were adept navigators and traders, but their social structure was more decentralized and geared towards warfare, a necessary skill in a region of competing groups. They lived in communal houses, and their daily lives were a blend of fishing, hunting, and small-scale agriculture. The interactions between the Arawak and Carib peoples were complex, involving trade, intermarriage, and conflict, creating a dynamic pre-Columbian landscape that was far from static. The arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1498 marked a cataclysmic turning point for these indigenous communities. Columbus landed on Trinidad during his third voyage, naming it La Isla de la Trinidad in honor of the Holy Trinity. His first encounters with the island's inhabitants were cautious, a mix of curiosity and misunderstanding. For the Amerindians, these strange ships and pale-skinned men were an unprecedented sight. For Columbus and the Spanish who followed, the islands represented new territory for the Spanish crown and, tragically, a new source of labor. The initial interactions quickly gave way to a brutal reality of conquest and exploitation. The consequences of European contact were devastating. The Spanish quest for gold, though largely fruitless in Trinidad, led to the enslavement of the indigenous population through the encomienda system, which granted Spanish settlers rights to Amerindian labor. Disease, to which the native peoples had no immunity, swept through villages, wiping out vast numbers. Smallpox, measles, and influenza proved far deadlier than any Spanish sword. Within a few decades of Columbus's arrival, the thriving societies of the Arawak and Carib peoples were decimated, their way of life shattered, and their populations reduced to a fraction of their former size. Their legacy, however, endures in place names, foods, and the very DNA of the nation. For nearly 300 years after Columbus's arrival, Trinidad remained a neglected outpost of the vast Spanish Empire. Spain was more focused on the immense mineral wealth of its mainland colonies in Mexico and Peru, leaving Trinidad sparsely populated and underdeveloped. The first Spanish capital, San Jose de Oruna, now known as St. Joseph, was a small, vulnerable settlement, frequently raided by rival European powers, and even by Amerindians from the mainland. The Spanish presence was tenuous, and the island's potential for plantation agriculture was largely untapped. Life was slow, the economy was stagnant, and Madrid's hold on the colony was weak, making it a tempting target for other ambitious European nations seeking a foothold in the Caribbean. The turning point for Spanish Trinidad came with the Cedula of Population in 1783. This was a royal decree designed to populate the island by offering land grants to Roman Catholic settlers from friendly nations. French planters fleeing the turmoil of the French Revolution and the slave revolts in colonies like Haiti flocked to Trinidad, bringing with them their enslaved Africans, their expertise in sugar and coffee cultivation, and their French Creole culture. This influx dramatically transformed the island's demographic and economic landscape. Suddenly, Trinidad began to develop a plantation economy, and its population swelled with French-speaking colonists and a large enslaved African workforce, setting the stage for a new era of agricultural production and social stratification. While Trinidad was under Spanish rule, Tobago became a pawn in the great colonial chess match between Britain, France, the Netherlands, and even Courland, a small duchy in what is now Latvia. The island changed hands more than 30 times, a staggering testament to its strategic importance and its fertile soil, ideal for sugar cultivation. This constant state of flux meant that Tobago's development was chaotic and often violent. Each new colonial master brought its own system of governance, its own settlers, and its own enslaved workforce, creating a fragmented and unstable society. The island was a battlefield, its harbors witnessing countless naval skirmishes as empires fought for dominance in the lucrative Caribbean sugar trade. The British, ever watchful of their rivals and recognizing Trinidad's strategic position near South America, finally seized the island from Spain in 1797 during the Napoleonic Wars. A powerful British fleet under Sir Ralph Abercrombie arrived, and the Spanish governor, Don José María Chacón, surrendered without a fight, recognizing the futility of resistance. Trinidad officially became a British Crown colony in 1802 under the Treaty of Amiens. Tobago, after its long and turbulent history of changing flags, was also finally ceded to Britain in 1814. The two islands, though geographically close, were now under the same imperial master, but would be governed as separate colonies for much of the 19th century, each with its own distinct history and character. Under British rule, Trinidad's sugar industry exploded. The British brought with them capital, technology, and an insatiable drive for profit, transforming the island into a vast sugar factory. Forests were cleared at an astonishing rate to make way for sprawling plantations, and the demand for labor became immense. This demand was met by the brutal transatlantic slave trade. Hundreds of thousands of Africans were forcibly captured, transported across the Atlantic in horrific conditions, and sold into bondage to work on the sugar estates. Life for the enslaved was one of relentless back-breaking labor from dawn until dusk, under the constant threat of the whip. They planted, harvested, and processed sugarcane, a crop whose sweetness masked the bitter reality of human suffering. The system of slavery was designed to dehumanize and control. Families were torn apart, cultures were suppressed, and any form of resistance was met with extreme violence. Yet, despite the unimaginable cruelty, the enslaved Africans resisted in countless ways. They preserved their cultural traditions through music, storytelling, and religion, often syncretizing them with European customs to survive. They mounted rebellions, staged work slowdowns, and escaped into the forested hills to form maroon communities. The spirit of resistance was unbreakable, and it, combined with the growing abolitionist movement in Britain, began to exert pressure on the foundations of the slave system. The fight for freedom was long and fraught with peril, a daily struggle for dignity and survival. The Emancipation Act of 1833 marked the beginning of the end of slavery in the British Empire, with full freedom granted in 1838 after a period of forced apprenticeship. For the newly freed Africans, it was a moment of profound significance, but the future was uncertain. Many refused to return to the plantations, associating them with the trauma of slavery, and instead established their own villages and small farms. This created a massive labor shortage for the powerful planter class who feared for the collapse of the sugar industry. Their solution would once again reshape the demographic and cultural landscape of Trinidad, introducing a new chapter of labor exploitation to the island's history. To solve the labor crisis, the British colonial government established the system of indentured servitude. Between 1845 and 1917, over 140,000 people from British India were transported to Trinidad to work on the sugar estates. They came under contracts, or gurmits, that promised a wage and a return passage after a term of 5 years. The reality was often harsh, with conditions that were little better than slavery. However, unlike the enslaved Africans, the Indian laborers were allowed to retain their religions, Hinduism and Islam, and their cultural practices. Most chose to stay after their contracts ended, accepting land in lieu of a return passage. This mass migration created a multi-ethnic society, laying the groundwork for the modern, diverse nation of Trinidad and Tobago. Throughout the 19th century, Trinidad and Tobago were administered as separate British colonies. Trinidad, with its booming sugar and cocoa industries and its diverse population, was the larger and more economically powerful of the two. Tobago's sugar economy, however, collapsed after the 1884 bankruptcy of its primary financial backer, the London-based firm of A.M. Gillespie and Company. Faced with economic ruin, the British government decided that the most cost-effective solution was to merge the smaller island's administration with Trinidad's. In 1889, the two islands were formally united into a single political entity, a marriage of convenience orchestrated by London, not a union born of popular will. This administrative decision would have profound and lasting implications for the future nation. The early 20th century saw the rise of a new consciousness in Trinidad and Tobago. The discovery of oil brought new wealth to the island, but the benefits were not shared equally. A growing working class employed in the oil fields, on the docks, and on sugar estates began to demand better wages, working conditions, and political rights. Charismatic labor leaders like Captain Arthur Andrew Cipriani, a white man of Corsican descent who championed the cause of the common man, emerged to challenge the colonial order. He founded the Trinidad Workingmen's Association and fought for social reforms and greater local representation in the Legislative Council, awakening the political aspirations of the masses and sowing the seeds of a future nationalist movement. The Great Depression of the 1930s intensified the social unrest. Widespread unemployment and poverty led to a series of strikes and riots across the Caribbean, and Trinidad was at the epicenter. The 1937 labor riots, led by Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler, a fiery and determined oilfield worker, shook the colonial establishment to its core. The protests were violently suppressed, but they marked a critical turning point. They demonstrated that the old system of colonial exploitation was no longer tenable and forced the British government to consider significant political reforms, including the expansion of voting rights and the eventual move towards self-government. The sacrifices of these early labor pioneers paved the way for the generation that would lead the nation to independence. The post-World War II era saw the rise of modern party politics and the towering figure of Dr. Eric Williams. A brilliant Oxford-educated historian, Williams founded the People's National Movement in 1956. He famously used Port of Spain's Woodford Square as an open-air university, delivering powerful lectures on history and politics that educated and mobilized the population. Under his leadership, the PNM dominated the political landscape, winning the 1956 general election and guiding the country through its final years as a colony. After the brief and unsuccessful experiment of the West Indies Federation, Trinidad and Tobago achieved full independence from Britain on August 31, 1962. 14 years later, on August 1, 1976, the nation severed its final ties to the monarchy and became a republic, with its own head of state. The story of oil in Trinidad and Tobago began in the mid-19th century with the discovery of surface oil seeps in the south of Trinidad. The first successful oil well was drilled in La Brea in 1866 by Walter Darwin, marking the birth of the petroleum industry in the Western Hemisphere. However, it was not until the early 20th century that commercial production began in earnest. The burgeoning demand for fuel, driven by the Royal Navy's transition from coal to oil-powered ships, spurred British investment. By the 1920s, Trinidad had become a significant oil producer within the British Empire, with refineries being built and a new industrial landscape taking shape around towns like Point Fortin and San Fernando. This new industry, dubbed Black Gold, began to eclipse sugar as the engine of the economy. The oil boom of the 1970s, triggered by the global energy crisis, transformed Trinidad and Tobago's fortunes overnight. As world oil prices skyrocketed, the nation's treasury overflowed with petrodollars. This sudden wealth funded massive state-led industrialization projects, particularly at the Point Lisa's industrial estate. The government invested heavily in downstream industries like methanol, ammonia, and urea production, aiming to diversify the economy away from simple crude oil extraction. This era brought unprecedented prosperity, fueling a construction boom, expanding the middle class, and funding free secondary and tertiary education. The popular Calypso slogan, "Money is no problem," captured the heady optimism of the time, as the nation rode a wave of newfound wealth. However, the reliance on oil and gas created a volatile economy, susceptible to the boom and bust cycles of the global energy market. When oil prices crashed in the mid-1980s, the country was plunged into a severe economic recession. The government was forced to seek assistance from the International Monetary Fund, leading to austerity measures, currency devaluation, and widespread social hardship. This painful period served as a stark lesson in the dangers of overdependence on a single commodity. In the decades since, there has been a concerted effort to leverage the country's natural gas reserves, which are far more extensive than its oil deposits. Today, Trinidad and Tobago is one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied natural gas, and a major producer of petrochemicals. The energy sector remains the backbone of the Trinbagonian economy, accounting for the majority of its export earnings and government revenue. The infrastructure is sophisticated, encompassing offshore drilling platforms, a network of pipelines, and world-class processing facilities. This industrial base has given the country one of the highest per capita incomes in the Caribbean. Yet, the challenge remains to diversify the economy and reduce its vulnerability to fluctuations in global energy prices. The government continues to explore ways to foster growth in other sectors like tourism, manufacturing, and the creative industries, seeking a more sustainable and resilient economic future that is not solely tied to the fortunes of oil and gas. The true heart of Trinidad and Tobago beats to the rhythm of its culture, a vibrant and explosive fusion born from its diverse history. At the center of this cultural universe is Carnival, an annual pre-Lenten festival often described as the greatest show on earth. It is far more than just a street party. It is a powerful expression of freedom and creativity, with roots in the masked balls of the French planters and the defiant celebrations of emancipated Africans. For 2 days, the streets of Port of Spain and other towns erupt in a riot of color, music, and dance. Thousands of masqueraders or mask players parade in elaborate costumes, while the air thrums with the sounds of a nation celebrating its identity. This celebration is powered by a unique musical trinity, First is the steel pan, the only acoustic instrument invented in the 20th century. Forged from discarded oil drums, it is a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of the urban poor who, in the 1930s and 40s, transformed industrial waste into an instrument capable of producing complex melodies. Then there is Calypso, the traditional folk music of the nation, a vehicle for sharp social and political commentary, witty storytelling, and biting satire. From Calypso, the faster, more energetic rhythm of soca music evolved, designed specifically to fuel the dancing and revelry of Carnival. Together, these art forms create the unforgettable soundtrack of Trinidad and Tobago. Beyond Carnival, the nation's cultural fabric is enriched by a multitude of traditions. The religious landscape is a testament to its multicultural heritage, with Christian churches standing alongside Hindu mandirs and Muslim mosques. Festivals like Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights, and Eid al-Fitr, the Muslim celebration marking the end of Ramadan, are public holidays celebrated by the entire nation. This official recognition of different faiths fosters a spirit of tolerance and shared community. The country's cuisine is another delicious fusion, where African, Indian, Chinese, European, and Amerindian culinary influences meet in dishes like roti, doubles, pilau, and callaloo, creating a unique and flavorful national palate. Despite this rich cultural tapestry and its relative economic prosperity, modern Trinidad and Tobago faces significant challenges. High rates of violent crime, often linked to drug trafficking and gang activity, are a major concern, eroding public safety and casting a shadow over daily life. Social inequality persists, with pockets of poverty existing alongside great wealth. The political landscape is often fractious and sharply divided along ethnic lines, hindering national progress and fostering a climate of mistrust. For the nation's youth, issues of education, employment, and finding a positive path forward are paramount. Yet even in sports, from the Soca Warriors national football team to its world-class Olympic athletes, the nation's competitive spirit and desire to succeed on the global stage shine through. In the end, the story of Trinidad and Tobago is one of extraordinary transformation. It is the story of how a small twin-island state, once a footnote in the grand ledgers of competing empires, forged a powerful and distinct identity. Its journey from being a collection of sugar plantations run on the brutal logic of slavery to becoming a sovereign, energy-rich republic is a powerful narrative of Caribbean resilience. The nation's history is not a relic of the past but a living force that continues to shape its present and future. The legacies of colonialism, slavery, and indentureship are woven into the very fabric of its society, influencing its politics, its social structures, and its cultural expressions in profound ways. The nation's greatest strength lies in its people and their ability to create a unique and vibrant culture from a history of displacement and oppression. The invention of the steel pan from the detritus of the oil industry is a perfect metaphor for this creative genius. The global phenomenon of Carnival is a testament to a spirit that turns the memory of struggle into an exuberant celebration of life. This cultural dynamism, combined with the economic power derived from its natural resources, gives Trinidad and Tobago an influence in the Caribbean and beyond that far outweighs its small size. It is a nation that has always punched above its weight, whether in diplomacy, music, literature, or sport. Of course, the path forward is not without its obstacles. The persistent challenges of crime, economic inequality, and political polarization are serious issues that require courage and vision to overcome. The nation's dependence on the volatile energy sector remains a critical vulnerability, demanding innovative strategies for economic diversification and sustainable development. The future will depend on the ability of its leaders and citizens to bridge historical divides, strengthen institutions, and invest in the potential of its young people. It requires a commitment to building a society that is not only prosperous but also safe, just, and equitable for all its people. Ultimately, Trinidad and Tobago stands as a compelling example of a post-colonial nation navigating the complexities of the modern world. It is a place of incredible contrasts, of industrial landscapes and pristine rainforests, of immense wealth and stubborn poverty, of joyous celebration and serious social problems. Its history has been a crucible, forging a people who are at once creative, resilient, and fiercely independent. The story of this unlikely republic is far from over. It continues to be written every day in the rhythms of the steel pan, in the debates in its parliament, and in the aspirations of its people, who carry the weight of their history as they build their future.